And we are super excited that we've conducted over 30 trainings across the continent, bringing on board journalists and equipping them really with the skill set of investigative journalism. What we do also do at the Institute is, as you may know, investigative journalism is very expensive. And so what we do is we give out some small grants to journalists who want to pursue investigative stories. So I would love to interest the journalists in Ethiopia to apply for small grants. If you have a good story, you can pitch that story to us and we see if we can be able to support you with budgets. You know, we may not fully meet your budget, but we can see how we can make a contribution to your budget as long as it's an investigative story. What we also do at the Institute is we encourage cross-border investigations and collaborations. And so if you have a story, for example, that, you know, is cross-border in nature, you know, that can be done, then we can also put you in touch with the journalists in the different countries to do collaboration. Like, for example, if there's a story on investigating River Nile, because the Nile starts from Uganda, and I think that the Ethiopians also have, you know, have it before it transits downstream Africa. We do collaboration. We encourage a lot of collaboration between journalists across the continent. But finally, we also promote a lot of legal support in case a journalist is arrested in line of duty. We have a team of lawyers who have dedicated and signed partnerships with us to cover them. In other words, to legally defend them in case they are arrested in line of duty. So that is what the Institute is all about. And I'm happy to be working with a team of about 9 people. And of course, we have other support staff who are out of the office. And so this is me. Right now, I am running the organization alongside with other journalists, investigative journalists, including Raymond Mujuni, Rahim Nwali, Grace Birunji. And of course, we also have our core team, Sandra and Talent, who are in our finance. And so we're super excited to be a center of excellence that is pushing for the growth of investigative journalism on the continent. My name is Solomon Serwanja, and I'm the Executive Director of the African Institute for Investigative Journalism. What we do here is to use investigative journalism as a tool for advocacy. Over the last 13 years of my life, I have dedicated it to journalism. What I've been able to do is to gain a skill in production. I have learned how to do a story comprehensively and tell it in a more compelling way. Because of those skills, I've been able to actually earn from them. I've been able to move the world because of those skills. I have been able to work with both national, regional, and international media houses because of those skills. Does your skill count in wealth creation? Yes, it does. So what skill do you have? As a news person who has spent the last 13 years of my life, it has been the skill set that I have collected that has actually made me the person who I am. I'm super excited about the upcoming NSSF Financial Literacy webinar coming up on the 22nd of November. We will be discussing, does your skill count in wealth creation? Do you even have a skill? How do you market that skill? And how do you stand up above others? Join us for that conversation by clicking on this link for you to register, and we'll be happy to have you in that room as we empower young people to improve on their financial well-being.
Okay, what makes investigative journalism different from other types of journalism?
Investigative journalism in its very nature is not your daily journalism. You know, where you go to cover parliament and you speak about, you know, this is what happened, where it happened, when it happened, and how it happened. Investigative journalism goes beyond just reporting the 5 W's and H. You have to dig deeper. You have to be laser focused on one issue and take a deep dive into it to expose evil or, you know, bad things that are committed. So investigative journalism is also evidence-based. It's not about he alleged, she alleged, he said this. It is often evidence-based. You must have evidence to back up every statement you say. And so investigative reporting, one, is evidence-based. Two, it is deeply researched or deeply rooted in research. But also three, it should be in public interest. Every story that you do should be in public interest. So, for example, if there's someone who is polluting the Nile, that's a big story, because then the public feeds off that, that Nile. If you have a corruption scandal, a government official is stealing money, that is in public interest. If you have, for example, people who are selling government medicines, you know, which are supposed to treat the normal people on black market, that is something of public interest. And so investigative journalism should be, and I should emphasize, must be in public interest. But also investigative journalism sometimes takes time. You can't do an investigative story in one day, you know. Some of those investigative stories take months, others take years, you know. And so sometimes we feel that some newsrooms have pressure to produce investigative stories every day or every once a week. It is difficult because you have to take time. You know, you can't produce a half-baked story because you say that there was pressure from the editors. But also this goes to the editors. Editors must be reminded that investigative stories take time. And so even whilst there's a lot of pressure coming in, because, you know, people want content, editors must be reminded that they should give journalists time to do stories.
For me, a very classical example of investigative journalism is a documentary produced by you yourself on BBC, Stealing from a Sikh, and it was watched by 500,000 of people on YouTube. And you've got a reputation by doing that documentary as well. And can you tell us the synopsis of the story, the entire story? Of course, I watched it. I have been researching about you before sitting for this interview, and I was really impressed by your job. And it's really a good example of investigative journalism in the continent of Africa. We're lacking to see such kind of journalists in Africa, and it's very threatening for your life and for your family. I have heard about that as well. So many journalists gunned down while doing investigative journalism in Africa. Before going to very deep of it, I need you to tell us a synopsis of that very impressive documentary on BBC, Stealing from a Sikh.
Well, I should say that I just first of all wanted to say a special thank you to the BBC, because I think that the BBC has taken particular interest in growing investigative journalism across the continent, and particularly because the people in the UK have given their taxpayers money to support investigative reporting. We have seen a number of investigative stories that have been done across the continent, from Johannesburg to, you know, Ethiopia, to Nairobi, to Uganda, to Nigeria. And this investment, I think, for me, should be appreciated. So on behalf of the continent, I think we really want to thank the taxpayers in the UK and the BBC Africa Eye at that for supporting investigative journalism, because, you know, through the experience that they share with us, we're able to get that skill set and be able to multiply it even without them being available. So imagine the experience I got while doing the Stealing from the Sikh investigation is still very, very central to the documentaries that I produce right now. And so for me, I first of all wanted to appreciate the BBC Africa Eye. But most importantly, the BBC Africa Eye investigation, Stealing from the Sikh, was about 8 months of hard work. And the story was pretty much trying to expose how the medical workers in Uganda, bad medical workers I should add, were stealing government medicines and selling it on the black market to the Democratic Republic of Congo and to South Sudan. Imagine going on the streets of Juba and finding medicine clearly labeled UG not for sale. UG is Uganda, not for sale, but you're able to buy it in pharmacies, on the streets. And then we then started to think, so who is doing this? And so the methodology of this investigation was much more of undercover and secret filming. And we caught people on camera selling government medicines. You know, we caught people on camera negotiating to sell vaccines that were meant to be for refugee communities in Uganda. And it took us a lot of time. But I should say also the investigation was very risky because, you know, when you're investigating cartels and big business people like those, they will come back and hit hard on you. And that speaks to investigative journalism. It is very risky. And sometimes as journalists, we are overshadowed with our passion to produce these stories, and we forget that it comes with its own consequences, which is why we need to have what we call risk assessment. And I think the BBC does that very well. For every story that they investigate, there must be a risk assessment form. The committee looks at the risks that potentially could come up and how they can mitigate these risks. And out of that, they're able to say, go ahead with your investigation. This is an investigation that has caused big impact in Uganda. I know, for example, that the Ugandan government has set up systems right now to electronically follow the medicine to the last user because of that investigation. I know that the president went on a nationwide campaign to actually speak up against selling of government drugs. I know, for example, that the State House Health Monitoring Unit has intensified its fight against the vice. It's interesting how one story can change the world, and one investigative story can be able to have such big impact. I mean, the most recent Panama Papers or the Pandora Papers that came out have led to resignation of very many you know, global leaders because they have been implicated in that. In my neighboring Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta came out to really speak up and speak out on why the Uhuru family was investing offshore, but also most importantly, that the Africa Uncensored team, which is led by my very good friend, John Allan Namu, has continued to show the power of investigative journalism. And I think they did that from Kenya, and the Kenyan government has been held accountable, especially the First family, on why they should invest out of Kenya rather than investing in Kenya. But that goes to speak about the power of investigative journalism. Just one story can lead to change. One story can change, you know, can change the way things are done. One story can lead to people being arrested. One story can lead to a national, you know, uproar, you know, to change the way things are done. And that goes to the power of investigative journalism, which is why we need to invest in investigative reporting and support entities that are there, you know, to support journalists to do investigative stories.
In a very sporadic way, malaria hit Ugandan population, and you have described that in your story script. In the documentary, the Ugandan government provide medicine for free for this malaria, but there is again time in which the medical team ran out of these tablets. In this case, medical doctors sell life-saving medicines, and you describe them as medical mafia. What does it mean by?
The way anyone who is committing evil does it is that they always are clandestine in nature. So what's going on, it was under the carpet. So you cannot easily see it. You know, how, for example, medicine is moving out of, you know, government facilities, and you end up finding it on the black market. There's a big cartel that was actually running this business, and, you know, being able to penetrate it was difficult, but eventually we had to, and we got it, and we exposed this evil. And I'm happy to say that out of that investigation, several people were arrested and prosecuted. Other people were released, but also now government has set up systems to really follow the medicine. It is now increasingly difficult for you to steal government medicines because of the systems that have been set up in different health facilities. And that speaks to the power of the story that we did alongside with the BBC.
A while ago, I tried to allude that many investigative journalists have been gunned down by government officials and authorities who have got leverage and immunity. And have you ever entertained such kind of threatening attempt?
Well, I'll tell you that investigative journalism is very risky in its very nature, like I said earlier. And I think it's Freedom House that documented the number of journalists who have been killed during investigations quite many, over 20 in their report. And that sends shockwaves to many of us who are doing investigative reporting, because in journalism school, we're always taught that no story is worth our lives, but someone has to tell the story anyway. And so, I mean, I have, been in harm's way so many times. I mean, I have been followed, I have been abused online by, a team of people who don't like what I do. I have been arrested before. And in that case, my wife and family was dragged into the investigation. So such stories, they are very, very dangerous. And this goes to speak to what are the available means of protecting our investigative journalists. If an investigative journalist in the newsroom does a story, it's important that the newsroom takes up a responsibility of protecting. For example, I know that, one of the things that can be done is, once you've done your investigation, or before it airs, fly them away, fly them out of the country, so that by the time the story airs in a safe place, right? Protect them. But also, the media houses need to be seen doing something to protect their investigative journalists. What normally happens is that after you've published a story, they'll tell you what is your next story, and none of them is concerned about your security, and I think that security of investigative journalists is very important, right? I know, for example, that the BBC has technology that can follow you in case you're in trouble. Anytime you just press it, and it will inform, the system that you're in danger, and they'll come and pick you out, right? I know, for example, that the BBC has safe places where they take journalists in case they're just troubled. But that's just the mighty BBC. How about our newsrooms within Africa? How about our newsrooms in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Uganda? What happens to your journalist if it's threatened, for example? So I think that our newsrooms need to pay particular attention to the security of the people doing investigative stories.
How do you describe trend and practical implementation of investigative journalism in Africa?
Now, first of all, I think that there is the number and quality of investigative stories that are coming out of the continent is one to pride in. We have seen, for example, through support and of, for example, the Africa Eye project, we have seen so many great investigations that have been impactful across the continent. So through, funding from development partners, from those that are interested in investigative stories, we've seen that the number and quality of these stories that are coming from the continent have increased, which is really good. But also we know that there is urgent need for training. There is urgent need for training, for example, in the latest technologies of investigative reporting, because where we are seeing investigative journalism going is using open source intelligence. I don't know if you've watched the investigation by the BBC Africa Eye on game of drones that was done in Egypt, on the anatomy of a killing that was done in Cameroon, or their recent investigation on racism. It speaks to how you can use and leverage on technology and open source intelligence to do investigations. So there is an urgent need for training. This is why the Institute is trying to look for support to be able to train as many journalists as we can across the continent in investigative reporting, so that we are able to improve and interest journalists to join investigative reporting. So one, we need to work on the skill set of the journalists. But most importantly, we need funding. Investigative stories are expensive. A story can take up to $45,000, $50,000. That's a budget for the entire newsroom for a year in some newsrooms. So then the editors then think, should we sacrifice $50,000, a budget for the entire year for the newsroom to do an investigation? No. We therefore need to start looking at what are the alternative funding models that can be adopted to support investigative reporting across the continent. And this is where the Institute comes in to support journalists. But we also need funding as well, right? And so how can we, for example, come up with subscription models where for people to watch good investigative stories, they need to subscribe, they need to pay? Or how can the Institute, for example, get funding so that we are able to also give some money to journalists? Beyond just looking at the budgets within the newsrooms and media houses, we need to find alternative sources of funding to support investigative reporting. But also, lastly, access to equipment. Investigative journalism requires, sometimes you need to do secret filming. How many newsrooms on the continent have secret cameras, for example? You know, secret recorders. How many newsrooms have editing computers in their newsrooms that many of them, you know, you have to queue. You know, you have like 3 computers, and those computers have to be used by video editors who are producing a news bulletin for every day. So when you get time to actually sit and work on your story, this is why at the Institute we've set up a center of excellence or a creative section where people can come with their external drives and they're able to edit their work. So we've created edit suites for investigative journalists across the continent who can, like, where they can come, work on their projects and leave. I wish I would show you around, but unfortunately, I may not be in position. But so the skill set, the tool set, you know, many journalists, for example, one story, a journalist can go out of town, maybe in village Ethiopia or rural Ethiopia, and they'll spend 1 or 2 months filming. But can your media house give you a camera for 2 months? Many of them don't have that patience because they also don't have equipment. And so what do we do at the Institute? We have tried to bring up and buy equipment, cameras that journalists like you can come and sign out and use, and then you can return them. So once we solve the skill set issue, we solve the funding issue, and we also solve the tool set issue, then I believe that the future of investigative journalism on the continent is really bright.
Let me get back to the first point. You are a winner of BBC Komla Dumar Award, and can you tell me about it and with which work you got such nominee?
Well, I think that the BBC Africa, the BBC World News Komla Dumar Award celebrates the legacy of former news anchor and reporter Komla Dumar, who was from West Africa, and he did amazingly well to tell the African story differently. And that award is given out every year, and I was privileged to win it in 2019. It's a prestigious award, and I think the most recent winner was Victoria Rubadiri from Kenya. But it goes to really encourage journalists across the continent that, you know, they can tell the African story. Whilst mine was so much, you know, towards investigative reporting, we believe that African stories can be told by African journalists. You know, I think for me, it's time for, you know, big international media houses to recruit African journalists to tell African stories. You know, you don't have to fly in a correspondent from France or from, you know, from Sydney to come and tell an African story. And I think that for me, the BBC is trying to do that, you know, and I think we've seen so many African journalists and reporters for the BBC reporting about the African story. And for me, it was life-changing because I got an opportunity to watch how news is done at the BBC. I was at the BBC for 3 months. I rubbed shoulders with some of the world's best journalists and editors. I remember spending time at the BBC Africa iDesk, which was fascinating. So, I mean, for me, it was breathtaking. Winning that award, it has changed my life. And I should add that the dream to start a center of excellence for investigative journalism was born in London after winning the BBC World News Komla Dumar Award.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh, by the way, I put Komla Dumar Award's image. I put Komla Dumar's picture in the office, and it's here. How can I show you? Yeah, wow. This is Komla.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you know, I always look at it every day, and it reminds me of our role as African journalists to tell the African story.
Wonderful. How do you do this secret filming? Can you tell you're trained for other journalists, or you don't need to reveal it?
Well, I think that that's a whole course unit. It's a whole course unit to study. But I mean, secret filming comes in very strongly to provide evidence to support your investigation. So, like I said, investigative journalism is evidence-based. And you need to have evidence. You can't say that the president of Ethiopia, stole money. You have to have that evidence to show that. So secret filming is just one of the tools that can be adopted to actually support you to get evidence, to present, because investigative journalism at the tail end can lead to prosecution, right? So it is done differently, and that's a whole course unit, my brother. I can't start telling you on the space right now.
Solomon Sarawanj, Ugandan famous investigative journalist and winner of BBC Komula Dumar Award. Thank you for making time to give us this valuable insight, and really appreciate on behalf of our media house.
Thank you very much for having me. And just one last thing, that when we come all together, we can really grow investigative journalism on the continent. I think that we must be deliberate on that. We must work together to actually produce investigative reports. But thank you so much for having me. And I want to welcome you one day to come and visit the African Institute for Investigative Journalism. We're also looking for partnerships with journalists from Ethiopia, so you can link them. You can ask them to follow our Twitter account, the African Institute for African IIJ, but also most importantly, you can invite them to go to our website and take advantage of the different opportunities that are on the website. They can reach out to us so that they can take advantage of all the different, opportunities, funding, trainings that we always have, collaborations, so that we can support, investigative journalism in Ethiopia as well.
Okay, thank you very much once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Okay, dear viewers, this brings you the end of our edition for today. Bye-bye. See you next time with another edition.